so I'm going to start. This is the way Merriconn looked when this was a cover. I don't know if I can put this up like, can you see? Yeah. That's the little booklet that I wrote for my grandchildren. And Chris ended up putting a couple copies in the library. I don't know how many of you actually saw it, but it was mostly pictures of Merriconn. This is the way Merriconn looked when Dad bought it back in 1932. This was the shed. In those days, this was built in 1783, and we think that this part was built nearby that time because they had to have kitchens and so on. They had the big kitchen was out a little bit behind this. This was the dining room. This was the boys' bedroom in our family, and up here were living room, parlor, two big bedrooms, and the attic. Is my pointer coming to all of you? Is this pointer showing up?
No, I'm not seeing it.
No,
Okay, so I won't
because
bother.
it's on Gordon's computer.
Okay, well, that's good because he can know what I'm doing. The strange thing about this is that they did the same thing that we did when we went up there every weekend during World War II. They closed off the summer kitchen and just used the winter kitchen, which was the dining room of the house. And what we never could figure out at first is why did they have a big sink with a pump in the dining room? Why did they have a cooking stove in the dining room? And they had the same thing again in the kitchen. And it didn't take long to figure it out. We did the same thing we did. They closed the kitchen off in the winter and the dining room between the winter kitchen because of not having to heat so much. So that was really two rooms in one. And the rest I pretty well explained. That's the way the house looked in 1932 when Dad bought it. Now I'll take the next picture. I just wanted to throw this one in because it could go anywhere. This was a picture from the kitchen window of both the old Merriconn, which you just looked at, and the new Merriconn, which is coming up. We loved our Monadnock Mountain. We climbed it every year, and the pond is a story coming up. But this is a picture, one of our beloved pictures that everybody had a copy of. And so I'm showing you that now. So you can go on to the next photo. This picture I'm showing because it shows the gardens and it shows the pond. When Dad bought this, before he bought it, he and our family were up there visiting our grandparents. And this parcel of land came for sale for 250 acres, and it was this farm. It wasn't called Merriconn then, obviously, but I guess Dad must have done, Mother must have done a lot of thinking because Dad in the Depression was a college professor at Syracuse University, and they didn't fire their professors, but they reduced their salaries, and sometimes as much as 40%. So Mother and Dad were struggling to raise a family of 6, and then have the Depression come. So when Dad saw this parcel of land being for sold and these buildings in the barn and all the wonderful things that he would need, he just couldn't resist. And I don't know how in heaven's name he did it, but they bought it. And they bought Merriconn, and they already had a house in Syracuse. And I say, I still don't understand how he did it. But what he did was we had ways of making money at Merriconn. I think this was his philosophy. He could make enough money to make his salary and Merriconn supply what the family needed. Some of those ways we made money in those days, the biggest way in the 30s was raising potatoes. And we sold bushels and bushels of potatoes. And that field, it was 10 acres, and about 2/3 of that field was all put into potatoes every year during the 30s. Then we had the little garden for Mother and later on for me to use for family. Another way we earned wood was the boys cut wood. They cut down hardwood trees, and then they dry for a year, and then they cut them up and sell them as cordwood. And we had quite a few customers in Harrisville that bought hardwood from us. Another way they made money was, well, we didn't make much money off the sheep because it was wool, and wool's relatively cheap, but we shared the sheep, 40 sheep every year. The sheep got shared, and a man came and took the wool away. The biggest income other than potatoes was blueberries. And Dad must have realized that blueberries was going to be one of his incomes because he had the 40 sheep for that reason. Sheep tend to nibble away and clear up all the brush and all the junk. And so the blueberry bushes in the blueberry, where the blueberry bushes were all nice and groomed, you might say. We could pick very easily. And we had those sheep. Those sheep were the last thing we got rid of in the, well, my mind's an old mind, but anyways, it was the last things we got rid of. Um, so we made money on the potatoes and the pond, there was no pond there. I take the next picture, Gordon. This was the pond before Dad and his older children and some men from here, from Nelson, helped him dig out this swampy area. There's the house, there's the potato field, and this was the pond. And we can go back to the new other picture, but this was dug up, dammed up, and this what it became was our pond. And it lasted till after, well, it lasted for the mid-50s. We kids were growing up in a way, and Dad wasn't able to keep it cleaned out with cattails and everything. So that's the pond. I guess that's all I have to say that. Well, no, I do have one more thing to say about the pond. In those days, the farms that didn't have water used wells. And throughout the blueberry pasture and the blueberry bush field and throughout the farm, there were wells. And they used that to water their livestock. The first livestock at Merriconn Farm, it wasn't Merriconn then, but back in 1700s, there was a horse farm. And you can tell that by the barn, but they raised horses. And so they had to have wells in the fields, and the horses got their water from the barrel filled up from the well. So Dad didn't want to do that, and he felt he didn't have to, and he produced the pond instead. Now we can go on. My favorite building on the farm was the barn. I just loved that barn. It was so big and so, it's just, I guess it was something in me that made me love it. But anyways, these first 6 windows, when I'm trying to point them, I don't know if Gordon can see this, he can do it. But the first 6 windows were horse stalls. We never used them as horse stalls. We never had horses because we had modern machinery. But we kept the horse stalls and we stored leftover stuff in them. The next 3 windows was a sheep pen. And we kept the sheep there when they wanted to come in. The cows didn't really need to be inside except when they were being milked. So these 2 windows represent cow stanchions where we milked our cows. This was the truck. This was an area for extra machinery like tractors and so on. And then this was the car. And after that was a tool shed on the end of the barn. It went the full width. These windows up above, the second floor windows were all hay mow. And it's interesting how we got the hay from the truck up to the hay mow, but I don't want to take time to tell you now. So if somebody wants to ask that question, if you really want to know, ask it during question time. And I'm ready for the next picture. The farm prospered from 1932 on up until the late 30s. The farm began to prosper. Dad made enough money to supplement his income. And so in 1938, we did 2 big things. He hired someone to build the barn, and I doubt that any of you know, but the man's name that built it was, I said barn, I meant lab. He hired someone to build the lab, and a man named Launder built the lab. I don't remember where he lived, but he built that. And what Dad wanted to do was to teach some courses up there and have the students earn their room and board by working on the farm, because Dad needed more help on the farm. So it was a win-win situation. It worked well for 3 years. The students paid Syracuse University for their tuition, and they earned the room and board by working on the farm. And that lasted until it lasted quite well. The next picture, please. Dad built 2 cabins, and they were like this. Each cabin had 2 beds in them, and they were for student lodging. And one of those cabins later became an ice house down by the pond. But this one is still standing up near what we call the Little Red House, which you'll show in a minute. So that's the story of the lab. It only lasted 3 years when the war started. And after the war, it never came back. We never revived it. It was just so that all that building and all was so beautiful as it was, only was used 3 years. Next picture. The Little Red House is, well, at the same time we had the the lab being built, Dad and the boys built this little red house. It's this little red bungalow. And he built it for caretakers. We were having, it was sort of a nuisance to keep the cattle and the sheep and have to have somebody come up all winter long while we were in Syracuse. So instead, Dad decided they'd build this and he'd hire a caretaker. And we hired Wilma and Charlie Ripley, and they were caretakers out in one of those big farms in Bennington, Vermont. But they were getting on in years, so they wanted a less rugged job. And they took the job at Merriconn. And they took care of the cattle and the sheep, and they overlooked the farm in the wintertime when we were in Syracuse. So it all worked out well. And the little other cabin is way back in here. You can see, I don't know exactly what it is, but it's back there. Now, this will come up later again, but this is where Dad, Bob, and I lived when we were building a new Merriconn. And you can see the bricks and so on. But right now, it's just one of the structures that we had at Merriconn. The next picture. This is just a general panorama. It's you drive in the yard. Many of you probably been there. You drove in the yard and the lab was on the left. Then you drive way over here and the big brick house and sheds and so on were on the right. Across the field, way across the field was the little red house, the cabin, and on the end was the barn. So that's the way it was all laid out. And those are the only buildings we had at Merriconn. Next picture. I wanted to talk about my grandparents because I don't know how many probably didn't know them, but you know the area where they lived. And they were such special people in our lives. Alfred and Carrie Struthers. Grandpa was a minister, but not in the Nelson Church other than to substitute. But he was a minister. He had this built in 1900, the turn of the century. It was a great big old building, and I'm showing it because it was located on the Upper Nelson Road, and I think Mike Stewart lives there now. I'm not sure. You can let me know maybe during question time. But when we left Nelson in the 80s, I think Mike Stewart was living in the replacement of this building. The beautiful story about this building was this bedroom. It was made for the grandchildren, myself and my siblings. And we spent a lot of time there when we were young. And being the youngest, I probably spent the most time there because when the family went on trips, they left me with Grandpa and Grandma. These two windows face Monadnock. This was the grandchildren's bedroom. And listen to see how big it was. It had 2 double beds, 2 single beds, a large circular table, which we did jigsaw on, and Grandpa and Grandma put a stool around, 4 stools around that table so we'd have a place to sit. It was the most beautiful arrangement. These grandparents, for me, were very special. And Grandma often entertained out on this side of the porch, which went 3 sides around the house, because she could see Monadnock. But that bedroom, Grandpa and Grandma called it their lamb's pasture. And they would look at us and they would say, and this is our lamb's pasture, and you are our lambs. And we used to get the biggest kick out of that when we were young, and we pretend being lambs and all. But Grandpa and Grandma called it their lamb's pasture. So that's the story up to that point, but it ends tragically, as some of you may know. In 1947, the place burned down and they perished in the fire. And it was the most dramatic time of my life. I'm going to just check my notes here. Okay. That was in 1947, and I'm not going to take the time to go into much of, except that after it burned down and the grieving was not completely over, but over enough, Dad and his 3 siblings decided to put some structure in its place. And so they chipped in and built what is now the building there, which I think Mike Stewart lives in. I guess that's all I have to say. It was sort of a memorial to Grandpa and Grandma and to that spot. This is thank you, Gordon. This is a picture of the newspaper article we found when we came immediately to Nelson from Syracuse when we heard the news. Well, you might be interested in that part of it. That morning, I answered the phone, and Mildred Quigley was the one that was calling us, and she was town clerk at the time. And she lived where the library is now. And she's the one that told us about the fire and what happened. And then Dad and I and Bob immediately left for um, the cottage. We had Merriconn too. So that was the part of the newspaper article. So I guess you can go on. This is a treasure one. It's a second treasured photo that we all saved and kept. This is my mother and my father, and this is Grandpa and Grandma. The cottage was across the road. This is probably all field now, but that was across the street where Mike Stewart now lives. I'm saying that, you're gonna have to correct me if it's wrong. But anyways, these poor people were so important in our lives, and they look just exactly like this. This was the greatest picture because that's the way they looked. So you can go on if you want. Another photo that some of you might have known my older siblings. This is Grandma, obviously Ash Wednesday. And this was taken out in front of the cottage. And this is my sister Jane, my brother Park Jr., my brother John, and my brother Al. And I figured this picture was taken about 1928 because John was born in 27. So it's approximation, but this is so Jane would have been about 8 or 9 years old when this was taken. Next picture. This is a picture, and this is sort of humorous because this was Grandpa and Grandma's first car. They were, at this time, they were in their early 80s. And so that was their first car. I don't know if it was a Model T Ford. I don't know cars that well, but that was there. And this is Mother and myself, Bob, and Park Jr. And we visited back and forth between the cottage and Merriconn all the time. They would come up and visit us, and Grandma would bring pies or cookies or something. Then we would stop on our way to Keene to see them. And we were a very closely knit family. And so the cottage and Merriconn, about 2 miles apart, were I don't know how to say it. They were important parts of our lives. You go on. So the next section is about the farm itself. We only had a working farm until 1941, and I'll get to that later. But when we had a working farm, we had acres and acres of potatoes, and we had cows and sheep and blueberries. And it was a busy place, and the whole family was working on it. This was Dad's first tractor. He had to walk it everywhere, and walking that big field back and forth, he finally decided he'd buy a better one. So I guess you don't have a picture of the new tractor. I thought I did. So anyways, he bought a tractor you sit down on, and it had a mowing machine attachment. It had a saw rig attachment. It had a scoop. It had all the things Dad would need. And he didn't have to walk anymore. He could sit. Next picture. This is the truck, a 1935 Chevy. He got it. It must have been one of the first things he got when they bought Merriconn. It lasted until the estate sale in 1975. We don't remember having much trouble with the truck, but boy, did we use it. It was used so much carrying produce to Keene and carrying furniture back and forth to Syracuse. And it just was a wonderful vehicle. And that and the new tractor, which there's no picture of it here, but that new tractor lasted until 1975. And they were the workhorses of that farm. Next picture. The Suburban was bought in 1941 after the war started. Now, this is a sad decade for the Struthers family. It was a time when the Struthers family completely changed. The farm became no longer a working farm. And the reason for that was that in 1941, my brothers decided to join up in the Army. Al joined the Medical Corps, Park Jr. joined the Army, and John joined the Air Force. And then to top it all off, poor mother, she just couldn't take this idea of her boys going to war, and she was not 100% well. She had high blood pressure and terrible headaches. And so that summer after Pearl Harbor, she had a stroke and died. So everything changed in our family after that. It went from a family of 8 down to a family of 4, and more often 3, because Al was there, but he was in med school and he was too busy to join in on a lot of the activity. Jane was away and soon married. So we went from a family of 8 to a family of 3 and Al, and the farm could no longer be a working farm. I often wonder how Dad, he was so stoic about it, but how he stood it, because all of a sudden that wonderful farm that was doing so well, and he just couldn't keep it up anymore. So the Suburban became the new workhorse. And the first year after the war, we went to the farm every weekend during the winter because Dad was afraid the government was going to take it over. I don't know if Dad was being overly paranoid or if it was really true. I don't know. My older siblings don't know either. But anyways, he worried about it. And Bob, he and I went to that farm every weekend. We only missed 2 weekends because of stormy weather. Thank God he didn't hold on to that fear. It wasn't a working farm anymore, really, but we never went back the next winter. We just went to Christmas and that was all, which is to my brother Bob's and my delight. So the Suburban was, it was like the truck. It just had so many jobs and it was such a useful vehicle, and it lasted until 1952. And when Dad turned around and bought another one, but the second one didn't have to work as hard. In those years after World War II, it was just Bob, Dad, and I. When we went to the farm, we did the haying. We kept 5 fields open. We didn't want trees crowding in. So we did the haying. We cleaned up all the trees that the older boys had cut down. They hadn't been cut up yet and sold. But after that, the farm became a summer home. We just went up there and mostly did our hobbies and our thing. And there was no actual farming going on. So 1940s were a traumatic year for us, but we got through it. So we can go on to, well, I want to go on the next picture, yes. We didn't sell a lot of hay because hay wasn't really that profitable, but in the early days, in the 30s when we were farming, we needed the hay to winter the cattle and sheep with. But this is a typical picture of the truck and a load of hay getting ready to be sold. Next picture. And we cut ice off that pond every year from 1932 to about I don't know, about the late 40s perhaps. So that was our refrigerator. And we did that every year. Next picture. And this picture is, I thought maybe some of you would remember Bob. Bob was more social than the rest. He was more like his mother. The rest of us were all like Dad, and we tended to be sort of introverted. But Bob was always wanted to be out with the crowd, and he loved those square dances. And I expect some of you may know Bob, so I thought you might enjoy this picture of him back in the 40s cutting wood with his father. Okay, next picture. So life changed completely, and after Grandpa and Grandma died, and that fire happened, Dad decided, and we're back in 1947 now, Dad decided that he was going to rebuild that wooden structure that was connected to the big Merriconn building. So he tore down the old L, which remember was the shed and the kitchens that I talked about. And he tore that down and started to build what we call the new Merriconn. And this is the way it looked when it was finished. I think, yeah, you can go on. There's a picture of Dad. Dad did it all himself. It took him 15 years to build that building. And he was still teaching at Syracuse, so he did it weekends, not in the winter, but summers and some weekends. He lived there for 15 years. That was his life, of building that new Merriconn. It was a big building. The next picture, Gordon, I think shows the excavation. This gives you a better idea of how big it really was. And you can see by working alone, it took him 15 years. Now, the rest of the family, we tended to help, but we were only up there when we could because we were all growing up and had our own jobs or schooling to do. No, Shatsy, no, not now. Um, and then one more picture I think we have of that era. Here's a picture of Al, Bob, and I helping Dad when he dug out the cellar hole for the new Merriconn. There's the tractor I was bragging about. Um, and there's the field that didn't have potatoes now because that was only in the 30s, but that's the field. So that gives you an idea of the buildings and what they were used for. Um, Dad worked on that building till 1962. He was 15 years building the new Merriconn, and you can bring that picture back up, I think. Yeah, no, next one. Next one, there we go. Um, in 1962, that whole spring, he was doing trips back and forth, bringing the furniture up from the Syracuse home. He sold the home, and then in June of 1962, he moved into the new Merriconn, which the garage you see here. Um, he he had to have a place. One more thing about when he was building it, he had to have a place to live, and he lived in the little red house, and that's where we lived when the new Merriconn was being built. We had to sort of makeshift around, but that was the main structure we lived in. Um, okay, I guess we're down to number 25. Well, one more thing about when Dad moved it to the new Merriconn, and you'll be interested in this, that's when he started writing the town history, the Nelson history. And he started in 1962 about, and then he published it in 1967. I remember Al and my kids and I went to a picnic that year to Old Home Day, and he was sitting there hanging out his books, the Nelson history. But that's when he started writing that. You might know his other books, some of his other books. In 1950s, he wrote two little books for the church to sell for money. One was called Tellable Tales, and the other was called the Nelson Cookbook. I think they might be in the library, I'm not sure. But he liked to write. He wrote all his textbooks for his students. He loved to write, and he had a flair for it. I think he liked writing. Now, this next picture is of Merriconn Gardens. Every Merriconn, the old Merriconn, the new Merriconn, had a garden, a perennial garden. And even the new Merriconn, after Dad finished it, he put in this Merriconn, he called it Merriconn Gardens. And the reason I show it is the castor bean. The castor bean plant is over on the left, a spectacular looking plant. And it sort of became a joke in the family because we didn't know it, but Dad eventually told us, he said, well, you know that the castor bean seed is poisonous. And I always wanted one at Lindale Gardens, but I didn't dare put one in there because I was afraid someone might end up eating a castor bean seed. But it was a beautiful plant. If you want a beautiful plant, grow a castor bean, but be careful. Um, but perennials seem to be part of the Struthers genes. I think my grandmother had perennial beds, I had perennial beds, and Dad had. We loved our perennials, and I think the reason we loved them so was because you could collect them, and they winter over, and you could keep adding new species, and so it was another way of collecting things. Aunt Joyce collected elephants, but I collected perennials. So there you go. Next picture. So Dad lived in the new Merriconn for about 15 years, and then it got so we didn't think he should stay alone. So I took care of him in the summer of '74, and then that fall in November he died. My sister took him to Ohio. She took care of him until November when he died, and then they brought him back, and he was buried in the Nelson Cemetery. Mary Upton did the funeral, and then we had to think about getting rid of all the stuff, Merriconn. So we had an estate sale, and we had Andy Elder. He was an auctioneer. I don't know if you know him, but he was the auctioneer around town, and he helped us. We didn't have an auction. It was just a straight estate sale. So one more picture of the estate sale here, Gordon. Yeah. And we had it on the 4th of July weekend in 1975. My brother Bob took charge of the barn, everything out of the barn. my brother Al took charge of all the other stuff that wasn't in the barn, but that we wanted to sell. And that was in the garage of the new Merriconn. And I was sort of overseeing things. My sister took care of the library. Dad had lots of books, not just the ones he wrote, but he had lots of books. Jane took care of that. And the 3 days are wonderful. We had good weather and we had fun and we met to meet a lot of people and it was just wonderful. I imagine some of you were there. I think Frankie Upton bought the tractor, but I'm not sure. I'll ask you when we have our discussion time. He either bought the tractor or the truck or maybe both. So I'd be interested to know if you know who bought what at that estate sale. I already told you we lived in the little red house when that was being there, but I've got to drop down here. We had, well, it's too late. I won't bother with that now. The next picture will be a picture I want only because it shows one of Dad's talents that nobody ever knows about except our family. He built cages that were the most amazing cages I've ever seen. And I taught in many different schools. I just wish so much I could have brought some of those cages to my biology classroom. But this is a butterfly cage. There's got to be a better word than cage for these pieces of furniture, but it was like a book. Those two brown pages were like a book page, and inside were butterflies. You can't see them because you're looking at the back of the page. There were the butterflies in the front of it. Then underneath were drawers, about 7 pairs of drawers. You open up and they were butterflies. This was a typical Park Struthers cage. It really was just wonderful. And he and Mother evidently got excited about butterflies before we were born because they had built this tremendous collection. And even when we were young, if we took trips, Dad would always say, don't forget the butterfly net. And he was still trying to add on to that collection. Over here is the gun cabinet. You can't see it, I don't think, but it had glass windows and it carried all the guns we owned. And that was another one. It wasn't a cage, obviously, but it was another piece of furniture that Dad built. And in the lab, there were reptile cages, amphibian cage, and I guess it was the main one. So no, I don't think we had a bird house or anything like that. But the reptile cage was one of the interesting ones because it was about 7 feet high and it had a tree. It was not living, but it looked like a tree. It acted like a tree. And the snakes used to slither up and down that tree. And we used to love to watch them. And they had turtles running around the bottom, but that was the reptile cage. The amphibian cage was the same idea, 6, 7 feet tall. It had a pond, it had ferns and moss and amphibians all over the place. And I had that in the kitchen at Lindale until we finished remodeling Lindale. So I just wanted to show you, he was so good at carpentry and furniture building. He built, I was hoping that maybe my nephew Alfred Struthers would be here because I gave him the toy chest that Dad built for me when I was 6 years old. It was typical toy chest perhaps, but he built in panels and Mother painted the famous fairy tale characters all around the toy chest. And if you ever meet Alfred, you ask him, he may still have it for all I know. But that's the history of some of Dad's talents. The last thing I want to talk about, and the last structure we haven't really talked about that much, the new Merriconn. We were active during the new Merriconn period. We had a lot of outings. John and Park inherited the Merriconn buildings and 13 acres of land to go with it. And Park Jr. wasn't as active up here, but John came up every summer. And in the early 80s, John had this new addition built onto the new Merriconn. Now, the new Merriconn didn't exactly look like a residential home. And my brother Bob, who had the great sense of humor, used to kid Dad about it. He said, Dad, it looks just like the so-and-so building on campus. And of course, the reason was that Dad got all his education about building with cement, bricks, and steel. In between classes, he'd go over and talk to these builders that were building new buildings on Syracuse campus. So Bob would kid him about that, but it did. It looked more like a university building of some kind. So John added this to it, and it was so pretty. This was taken 10 years after no, taken right after my husband died. I took a trip up there. We stayed with Dave Paddock, and I went to see this. The landscaping was not done, so it was, it looked a little rough, but other than that, it was a great looking building, I thought. At least it didn't look like a campus building. John kept it for about 10 years, and he sold it to a Nelson resident who used it for rental property. And he kept it, well, he still owns it, but we're not sure why he had all the buildings torn down. So Merriconn itself lasted about 90 years, and then there's nothing there. I would be interested in it. I haven't wanted to go back. I don't feel I should drive that far now at my age, but even if I go back for some reason, I don't know if I would go see it, I'm sure, but it would be hard. So that is it. The last picture is the creator himself, the old man. And this was taken after the new Merriconn was built. And here's Dad having one of our outings. This is before he had I think this must have been early on, because it was before he had the perennial garden. I would say he was in his early 70s, maybe here, maybe a little older. He lived to be 83. And he had hardy blood in him, but he didn't have the hardy longevity, because most of the Hardys lived to be in their 90s. And some in their 90s, some like Priscilla Waller is quite beyond 90. So that's all I have. I hope it helps you understand Merriconn, understand it wasn't a bomb shelter, understand why Dad built it, and understand why his family loved it so. We had so many ways to love it, and that's my lecture for the day, as Dad would say.
We just found a couple of, I took a couple of Google Earth images this morning, just for people that may not know where Merriconn was. And this is all very approximate, but you can see where the village, where Tolman Pond is, and so forth. And that cleared area is the area that we've been talking about. And then here's just kind of zeroing in.
Can you point out what's in that area, right? Exactly what that is?
Well, this would be the general site, but I don't know beyond that where things were, because I wasn't that familiar with it.
Do you think that what you're pointing at was the big field at Merriconn?
I think so. I believe so, but I'm not. Yeah,
Yeah,
Dave,
I understand.
we have some thoughts about that. I'll take this away, but we can come back to this picture, if it becomes relevant. But now we can open it up to the many people. So I think the thing would be that if you have something to say, just take yourself off mute and start talking, and then people will know that you're talking, and wait.
So if you want to ask Lindy a question, you can just raise your hand.
Lindy,
Yeah.
it's Judy. I have a question.
Judy,
Or
Judy.
I just have a comment. I remember the grapes, the grapevines, and how sweet those grapes were up there that we picked opposite the house. If you looked at the barn, they were on the left-hand side area, probably around on Linda's and Tom's property edge there. But I often wonder whether there are any vines left there.
Now you're talking about Merriconn, right?
Yeah, the grapes.
I don't remember grapes. Was my father living then?
No, it was after, and I think you were the ones, or I don't know how we learned about it, but anyway, I remember those were the sweetest grapes that I remember picking. The other thing that I remember is sliding down that hill on sleds. That was just where the potatoes were. And then the other thing, Mike lives in Stoddard now, so I'm not sure who lives in that house. Maybe they're here watching, but Mike's been in Stoddard.
Airbnb.
Huh?
I think that house is an Airbnb.
Ah, okay.
Is
And
that
then
next to Charlotte? is that next to Charlotte Jones's house? That
Lindy?
house Lindy, is that house that you said that Mike Stewart lived in? Is that the house that's next to Charlotte Jones's house?
Exactly, right.
Okay. Yeah,
Okay.
that's an I think Jan Forney runs it as an Airbnb. She
Oh,
runs
okay.
both of she runs
Okay.
both of those houses as an Airbnb because we looked at it as a possible venue for some
Oh,
overnight
okay.
guests.
Does she use the big yellow Hardy house next door? Is that used as a bread and breakfast too?
Yes.
How about that? Good for her. All right.
Hey,
Yeah.
Lindy, this
I
is
have a
Betsy Street.
Betsy-
Jan Forney owns the Charlotte's house, and then
Yeah.
another sibling owns the Yellow House.
Oh, okay,
Oh,
okay.
But Jan spends quite a bit of time up here now.
Yeah. Well, Jan was our contact person for both houses, so I didn't know.
All right. I forgot
Lindy?
about that. Yes,
I have
yes,
one more
yes.
question, Lindy. Do you
Yes.
still have chickens?
I've always had chicken. I don't right now, but my grandson brought a 9 chicken eggs about, oh, I don't know, quite a few years ago. And he said, Grandma, could you incubate these for me? And I did. And out of it, I got 6 chickens and 1 rooster. But before that, when I was teaching, I always had a rooster in the classroom. And one rooster I used to bring up to Nelson in the summer. It was called Buck-a-Buck. And it had feathers on his feet, and it was a cochin. And I had it in that classroom for over 5 years. It went to, I don't know how many homes, weekends. And I've always loved chickens.
You brought Buck-a-Buck to church too. I remember him
Okay.
sitting on the edge of the wastebasket while you were preaching.
Yeah, right. That's where he sat in the classroom, was on the wastebasket. And I didn't think the principal would let me keep him because he crowed every periodically, but the principal thought it was a great joke. So I was lucky I got away with it.
That chicken, Maureen? That rooster? No?
Lindy,
I didn't hear it. Oh, hi, Hope.
Brian now has about 12 chickens and he remembers back to clowns and stuff and he remembers Buck-a-Buck.
Is that right? All right.
Yes,
You
yep.
said That was Brian?
Brian.
Brian, oh.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. to
that's
know. Thank you for that, sir. That's my hit.
Lindy,
Lindy,
didn't you
Wait a
have
minute,
trouble?
wait a minute. I use a
Lindy, didn't-
track phone for Lifeline and it just went off. Okay, now I'm ready.
Lindy, didn't you have trouble with a chicken at your home in Syracuse? I thought a neighbor gave you a hard time.
Uh-oh.
Was it a rooster?
No, I thought you had a chicken in it.
Oh, I've always had chickens, but I don't remember any particular.
Well, they objected to having livestock in
Oh,
your suburban home.
No, I never had chickens with an S on it. I just always had 1 or 2 chickens at a time, but for some reason, I always loved chickens, but I don't know what you're referring to, Dave. Maybe we can talk later about it. I never had any particular trouble. Well, unless maybe you're referring to when I hatched those eggs out for my grandson, I kept the 1 rooster and one hen. And I used to walk them up and down the street. I have a little leash on them, and I got into trouble because the rooster would crow every morning, and the neighbors began to complain. So I don't know
That's what I remembered.
is that what you're talking about?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And so I had to get rid of them, and it was so sad because I had walked them and they were used to me, and when I walked them out to the car to send them off to where they're going to go, they followed me out, and I thought, you don't know what you're doing. But it was so sad. But chickens are special. I guess I'm a chicken lover.
There you go.
Do you all look so great? So great to see you.
Lindy, can you hear me?
I sure can.
This is Bert. Priscilla's on the telephone. She's been listening to all of this. And
Oh,
she
good.
says she remembers very many happy days up there on the farm when you were there.
And You know, I'm so glad you say she's on the phone?
Yeah, she's
What?
listening by phone.
Well, if she can hear me or you can relate it to her, I wanted to mention it. When Dad dug that pond, that swampy area to make the pond, guess who helped him? One of his helpers, he had his two older sons were old enough to help him. And he had Theron Thompson, I think, or Theron, was Priscilla's last name Thompson?
Yes.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I think it was her brother Theron helped Dad dig out that swampy area for the pond. And I'd love to talk to her. Maybe she remembers it herself.
You remember that? Were you there? Priscilla says she was there too.
He said she was there too?
Yes.
And she also called this morning and left a message for me that she wanted me to relay, which was that in 1937, in the summer of 1937, she slept in the Red House. She didn't leave any details about what the occasion was, but she wanted me to convey that.
The Red House was hardly, I didn't think it was built yet, but maybe it was. I don't understand that. I have to talk to her about it. Maybe I'll call, can I call her?
Yeah, but not directly. She's on the phone now, and she said that she was there because Park had gone to Venezuela and she was taking care of the property.
Oh,
Huh. Well, that, I don't remember that, but I'd sure love to talk to her. I wish I could drive up to Nelson, but.
Wish you could.
Does she ever phone call? Does she make phone calls herself?
Oh, yeah.
oh,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
Was that in,
Sure can.
she wanted to know if that was in 1937 is what she recalls when Park went to Venezuela with students.
Well, the little red house was built for caretakers, and that, I don't think it was built by 1937. I wonder if she's talking about the big brick house or the old farmhouse.
House? She said she slept in the Red House.
Okay, well, you remember the first picture I showed here, that L, the kitchens and all, that was red. So I think she's probably thinking of that building there.
Mhm.
Lindy?
Yes, all right. Maury, how are you?
Yes, Maury Collins. Soon after I came to Nelson, I went with Claude Hutchins up to Merriconn, and we walked through the bomb shelter. I'd never seen a bomb shelter.
Yeah, we laughed about Dad never, I don't think Dad ever thought about it being a bomb shelter, but I can understand why you people might have thought it was. But his main fear was fire because of his parents burning. And he just wanted to be sure it wasn't going to burn up with fire. I don't think he ever thought of being a bomb shelter. But.
Well, that was what was implied to me, that it was a bomb. It was to be a bomb shelter. So I don't know how the story changed or whatever.
Well, I remember when we were looking for a house here in Syracuse, one of the houses we looked at had a bomb shelter. But I didn't see that it was any safer if a bomb fell on it than if not. I don't know. But at any rate.
It was built at the height of the Cold War, and I think it was built so strong and so thick, the walls, that everyone just assumed it was for atomic bomb prevention.
Yeah, that's understandable. We realize it, and you could see why you would think it was a bomb shelter, but it wasn't. As I say, it wasn't Dad's intention. I never talked about bombs. I guess it would have been one of the safer places you could have gone in case there was a bomb around, but.
Thank goodness we didn't have a bomb around.
Carolyn, my name's Eliza, and I actually am the daughter of the Nelson resident that bought the property. So while there is sort of an end part of.
Okay, slow down. You're the daughter of someone who bought the property. Which property?
The Merriconn, the old Merriconn. So
Really?
yeah,
Are you?
Buzzy
so
Laughlin's daughter.
You still own it?
Uh-huh.
Are you, so
Yeah.
you're related to Buzz?
Yeah. I'm his
Okay.
daughter.
Okay. Oh, hey, I'm glad to, yeah, so
So nice to see you. And the story is incredibly meaningful and beautiful. And thank you for sharing it.
okay, I'm glad to see you.
Well, I wanted to tell you that while there, there are parts of the story that, I don't feel great about where things have gone, but I also feel like there have been amazing experiences. I have a little boy, not a big boy, he's 16 now, in a couple days, but my twins were born in the upper part of, those apartments that were built, the upstairs of the new building. This is Orion, and Carolyn's father was Clark Struther, who built Merriconn, where you were born. And we just have had so many amazing experiences loving that place.
Did you ever live in my brother John's? Didn't they build it at all? Did you?
I lived there, yeah. And my younger brother lived there, and we both had home births with
Nadine's daughter and
our
Buzz's daughter.
babies were there.
Right.
And we
Did
picked
it have-
blueberries.
Tell me, did it have running water?
Yep.
It did.
Yeah.
Because we never had running water. In fact, there was a big joke in our family when Dad built a new Merriconn, and at my wedding, when I got married there, we gave Jane the honor of using the new bedroom, and it had running water because we never had running water until Al and I built our own place. And so, but that did have, so John beat, no, he didn't, because we had Lindale first, but so I always wondered if Buzz or whoever built it put running water in it.
I have a question.
Sure.
As you've told the story of where the different structures are, when we first were part of the property in the, I guess in the 80s or 90s, there was a structure across the street from sort of the main house that was there that was sort of a lab. Is that where your lab was? Was it just across the driveway?
I don't, it sounds like a lab, but I don't see how it could be, because Dad used the wood from the lab to build the forms that were needed to build a new Merriconn, and pour cement in the forms that, you pour cement in to build cement walls. And he used the wood from the lab to do that. And all the stuff in the lab was stored in the barn. So I'm thinking it had to be the little red house.
It was a little tiny, yeah, must have been the little red house.
Do you know, is a cabin still there?
Then there was a structure, and there were, at my little childhood mind remembers that there were sort of lab materials in there.
Probably was a little red house.
Yeah.
Someone wrote on, I don't know, some period, some paper, I don't know if it was the grapevine or what, but mentioned that the cabin was still standing. Maybe other people in this Zoom can tell me if the little cabin is still standing there. I know the red house was torn down eventually.
It was a very magical place to spend my childhood.
Where are you living now?
In Keene.
Okay. Well, I'm so glad to talk to you.
You too.
Yeah, say hello to your folks for me.
Sure thing. Yeah, I'll share. I hope it's okay. Sounds like the library has a copy of the book, but I did take some screenshots so I can share with.
The library has a copy of what we talked about today. Is that the one you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing this.
You'll see the same pictures over again, but a few more stories maybe. Oh, this has been wonderful.
Lindy?
Yeah.
It's Rick Church.
Ah,
Could I ask a couple of questions?
sure.
Your father built the new Merriconn,
Yes.
right on the old Merriconn.
Well, next to it. Yeah,
So-
well, on it, in a sense, it was on it.
So was the old Merriconn, weren't you living there?
No, we were, our main home was in Syracuse, New York, but
Right.
when we went up there, let's see, that went up to 1940, before my grandparents burned to death, we were living there. You're right. And then not long after Grandpa and Grandma burned to death, Dad was worried about fire. So he in 1947, later in 1947, he tore down that wooden structure, the kitchens and the shed. And then we lived in the little red house.
But what was the beautiful old brick house?
Old
not-
brick house was used as a guest place. We had the little red house only had 2 bedrooms. So I was home a lot at that time. I kept the cabin beds ready for company. I kept the bedrooms up in the big brick house ready for company. And that's how it was used.
Okay, and I got one other question. Over near, you showed a picture of a house that's still standing, a little where the students lived.
Right.
And that's up toward where Tom Murray and Linda Cates have that piece of land up on top of the hill now. But before you get there, as you go from Merriconn in that direction, was there a house on the left, on the other side of the road?
Well, I think you're talking, I've lost you there somewhere, but if you you know where the road would be in front of the big brick house, the big original brick house?
Yep.
So where were you, no, in terms of that, where are you talking?
Okay, if we're standing on Merriconn Road, looking at the front door of the old brick house,
Mm-hmm.
Merriconn Road would go off to your left.
Right. I got you.
And you would go past the pond, which on your right. And and then you would get to this cabin that I'm talking about on the left.
That was pretty far out, right?
Yeah, well, it's maybe 300 or 400 feet from the brick house.
Well, the only thing
But over on that side of Merriconn Road today, there's an old cellar hole. And I was wondering if there was a house on top of that in your memory.
So are you talking going past the barn and out on further on out?
Yep, that's right. Go past the barn, past the pond.
Yeah.
And then on your left would be this cellar hole.
Yeah, if that's a cellar hole, I think you're talking about, but that's a little bit off the beaten track, but it was a big area and we never knew a house there, but it was definitely a cellar hole for some house.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
That's where the grapes were on that, right after that house, right in there.
What about it, Judy?
Grapes.
I said, that's where those grapes were. Just right behind that house.
Okay, yeah, I remember. Yeah, you remember the grapes. All right. Yeah, now I know what you're talking about. It's good that I don't think they're still there. I don't know though.
Concord grape?
I don't know.
There was a family that lived further on out that road with the gentleman I just talked with. Does someone still live out there? Oh, going out towards Uncle Sky's way out?
Is that where Ed Scott lives?
Was there a family named
Yeah,
Scott?
that's Ed Scott.
Ed Scott lives out there.
Pardon me?
Ed Scott lives out
Ed
there.
Scott.
Yes.
He's got like a little farm going on.
Okay, I can't understand what you're saying. You're saying the family named Scott lived there?
Yes.
Ed Scott, who at one point was a selectman in town, and he had a motorcycle shop in Keene area. I don't know what he does now, but he and his wife or lady friend, whatever, lived there, and they got like a small farm out at the very end of the road.
They do, we're talking about the Merriconn area, huh?
Yes,
How about that?
you would cut, as you came to Merriconn, just past where the brick house was, you'd make a left, cross over in front of some apple trees, and then make a right and go out to the very end.
That's right. That's the way I visualize it. And that cellar hole that the gentleman I was talking with earlier was to the left of that road that went out to Scott's.
Yeah. That was way up in that area where all those beautiful big oak trees were, the hardwood forests were all up in there.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's where the fairies used to play and dance.
It's funny because we often talk back here in Syracuse, that you don't see the oak trees like we used to see in New Hampshire. Hey, now who's this?
Lindy, this is Jan Perry here, and I have a question for you. Can you hear me?
I sure can.
So we met many years ago, and we moved here in 1994. And first I have a question, and then I wanted to let you know something else. So the question is, the Merriconn, there's a big stone to the right of what used to be the brick house and it said Merriconn something and an early date until 1932. But I was curious why someone chose to mark it with the starting of the farm and then end Merriconn with a 1932, when in fact, of course, it was not taken down and you still farmed it in the 30s. Do you know anything about that?
Well, I have trouble understanding everything you're saying, but you're talking about the big stone as you entered the main property up at the top of you're talking about the stone that labeled Merriconn?
Yes.
And it had the dates, and you're wondering why it was 1932?
As the ending date, yes.
Well, can you give me the other dates and I can probably answer your question? If that was the
Rick
ending date.
might know. Yeah, I think it's from the 1700 is the earlier date, but I'm not sure. I just remember 1932 as the ending date.
Probably because it was that the big brick building and the big original buildings were built in 1783. And Dad bought it in 1932. So forever, whatever that, his logic was that, well, all right, the place was built in 1783. It became Merriconn in 1972 or what,
Okay.
1930.
So Lindy, the other thing that I wanted you to know, when the brick building was taken down, we were able to purchase from Buzz Laughlin one of the old hearthstones. So one of the
you were able to purchase
one of the old hearthstones from the old brick house, and it is now our front main stone, and we also have a foundation stone as the first step into our house now. So that will be here forever.
Where do you live?
We live on the main road, 9/10 of a mile south of the village.
So,
You might remember Donna Shangra.
oh yeah, I remember Donna.
Yeah, so
Her husband died when I was active there.
Right. So Donna has moved to Maine, but we still live in the house in the shared driveway that was across the way from her.
I do know that place well. I remember Donna and her husband was a gem. And so that's
so Lindy, we're not in Donna's old house, but we are in a house that was built in this, like right next door.
Right next to it. Okay. And the stones you have, were they that old brick house? We always marveled at how well it held up, because we have houses across the street that were built less than 100 years ago, and their roofs are starting to show it. That brick house is just, I don't know how they did it back in the old days, because that was all field stone, where the foundations were stones they pulled out of the field, and it held up beautifully. Now, you said yours was a foundation stone because there were big steps going into the front door. I wondered if maybe you got one of those.
Well, if you ever visit again, you'll have to tell me, but one of the steps, the hearthstone, of course, is beautiful. It's perfectly smooth. The other one is very well fashioned. They cut it well. And when we had someone put a boot scraper into it from Peterborough, he was marveling at how beautifully the stone had been worked.
How about that? Oh, I wish I could see it. Oh, I wish I could get up there. I wish I had the courage to drive up there. I drive all over back here, but I don't know. It's so wonderful. I hope to meet you sometime. You're Judy Perry?
Jan Perry, and you did meet me when we first moved to town, Lindy.
I did what?
You did meet us when we first came to town. You did.
Oh, okay.
But that was a long time ago, and I looked a lot different.
Now, are you related, unless I'm not hearing the word right, are you related to Susan Perry?
Nope, that's Susan Peary. That's Gordon and Susan Peary. So I'm Perry, they're Peary.
Okay. I'm so glad to meet you. And I hope that somehow maybe I'll get my granddaughter to drive me up. Okay, Hope. Where there's hope, there's hope.
No, I was just going to say, Jan, would it be possible for you guys to take a picture of that stone, or both stones, and send them to her?
Lindy,
Yes.
This is Joan Lang again. I have, I don't know.
We get an answer to Hope's question? Were you directing your question, Hope, to Jan Perry?
Yeah. She was. She asked Jan if Jan would take a picture and send that picture to you.
Oh, she wasn't expecting an answer maybe then.
No.
Okay.
But I have a question, Lindy. I may have missed it because I know it and I might have just dismissed it. But did you explain why the farm was named Merriconn?
No, I guess I took for granted everybody knew it. I should have said it. It was named Merriconn because the water's off the barn roof. One side of the roof, it flowed south into the Merrimack River. The other side, it flowed north into the Connecticut River. And Mother was the one that invented the name, and that's why it was called Merriconn, Merrimack Rivers and Connecticut Rivers. So now you know. David. Trying to figure what room that is I'm looking at.
Well, it's office, studio office near the
Office, oh, okay.
driveway. One question about your castor plant that's poisonous. Do they make castor oil from the beans of that castor plant?
It's possible. Do you know? You're a doctor. Do you know?
Well, it makes sense, but if it's poisonous, makes me concerned.
Well, yes, it would, but I imagine ways of I'll look. I'm sure you and I both go to the Google and look it up, but I don't know. I did read about it. It seems like maybe it was something to do with that, but I'm not sure. I don't want to say for sure. And I'm not sure how poisonous it was. That's the thing. It might take a while a lot of it to kill somebody, but I just didn't dare chance it.
Just poisonous enough to do the job.
That's right. But what a beautiful plant, boy.
So I have a question actually for David. Is part of the land that you've been clearing, was that part of Merriconn?
Yes, it was all.
Okay.
Merriconn.
All of it?
So
okay.
I think there may have been some land that Park acquired after the original farm, because I think there's more than 250 acres
That's picture of that board.
that comprise the whole of Merriconn.
Okay. Thank you.
I can't help you too much. I don't, being the youngest child, I didn't probably learn as much as the older guys did, but.
Well, Lindy, David has done an amazing job of clearing the land up there.
Well, I
and
know
so that it now has, you know, the beautiful views of the mountain and off to Vermont, and
yes.
It's just lovely.
Alex and I just treasured David Paddock for what he's done, and we sold him a lot of the land, but it was because he took good care of it and did so much like you're talking about, and we just treasure that.
Hi, Lindy. This is Sarah Paddock.
Oh, Sarah.
Hey.
Oh, boy.
So good to see you. And Eric's here too. We've been listening the whole time.
Eric. Oh,
and we take walks up there almost every single day and make sure everything's okay up there. It's
good for you.
A beautiful spot and very sacred to us.
Yeah.
The kids love it, and we spend a lot of time up there. So
you live in your grandfather's house, right?
We do. We live in Nana and Bobby's house on 61 Tolman Pond Road.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It looks so great.
Yeah, we're doing great. It's so good to see you.
It's been 20 years or so since we've seen each other.
Oh no, we saw you. I guess it was.
That's right. You and the kids came.
We stopped by on our way through to Michigan, and we've seen you.
I remember now. Yeah. Eric, you're teaching?
I am, yes.
Where?
I teach in Ackworth, New Hampshire.
Okay, that's what I thought. And you have a church right now? Or?
I do. The Wilmot Congregational Church. Yep.
Okay. Oh, gosh.
So it's good to see.
For the rest of you, when I was minister up there, Sarah was one of my, I don't know how you say it, but she was just wonderful. And I was so thrilled when she became a minister. It was just a storybook, wasn't it? Storybook stuff.
Well, it's due to you. You were my mentor, and I went into ministry really because of you.
Well, thank you for that, because you were the, I remember we had the clowns,
Yep.
CLOWNS clowns, and I remember you were so good at everything. I had you sort of take over at times, and it was
Well,
really,
I too, like Brian, I remember Buck Buck and and all the chickens and yeah,
oh dear.
yeah. Anyway, just wanted to say hi, Lindy. We miss you.
Hi to you, sweetheart. Come by next time on your way west. Come by.
We will.
Yeah.
We will. We hope to do that this summer.
Okay, great. And any of you that come through Syracuse, New York, I've got 2 guest rooms and I'd love to see you. Get this darn COVID out of the way. Yeah.
But we're so grateful that we were able to see you here in Nelson virtually. What a treat this has been.
Isn't it a wonderful age we live in? You know, I often think what my father would say. But I won't get into that. But
So-
it's just so wonderful to see your faces. It was the
Oh,
same.
yeah. You know who that is? Yes, you do.
What's this?
I think it's just an unmuted mic. There we go.
My, I've only Zoomed twice now. This is the second time. The first time was Christmas Day, and my family have been overly protective of me, so they won't let me go anywhere. But Christmas Day we Zoomed, and what a thrill to see all the great grandchildren, and they all laughed and giggled and reminisced, and it was just so wonderful. And I often thought, what a wonderful age we live in.